The bitter Wyoming wind cut through Clara Withers's threadbare shawl as she stood outside the ramshackle cabin that had become her prison of poverty. Her twins, Samuel and Sarah, huddled against her skirts, their small bodies trembling in the December cold. At 23, Clara felt ancient, worn down by loss and the crushing weight of being unwanted. It had been 3 months since the avalanche took Thomas, 3 months since her world collapsed along with that wall of snow on Bridger Pass. She could still hear the thunderous roar, still see his hand reaching out before the white death swallowed him whole. The search party found his body 2 days later, frozen in an eternal gesture of desperation. "Mama, I'm hungry," little Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the whistling wind. Clara's heart clenched. The last of their cornmeal had run out yesterday, and the townsfolk of Mercy's Bend had made it clear that credit was no longer extended to worthless widows. The memory of yesterday's humiliation burned fresh. She'd gone to the general store, swallowing her pride like bitter medicine, only to have Mr. Garrett look through her as if she were invisible. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Withers," he'd said, not sounding sorry at all. But without a man to vouch for you, without collateral, his eyes had swept over her dismissively. "Perhaps you should consider moving on. This town's got no place for those who can't pull their weight." But it was her late husband's family who delivered the cruelest blow. Martha Withers, Thomas's sister-in-law, had arrived that very morning with her husband Jacob and 2 hired hands. They didn't knock, just pushed through the door as if Clara were no more than a squatter in what had been her own home. "Time's up," Martha announced, her pinched face radiating satisfaction. "This cabin belonged to Thomas, and now it belongs to the family. You've imposed long enough." Clara had tried to reason with them. "Please, Martha, for the children, they're Thomas's blood." "Don't you dare," Jacob interrupted, his face flushing red. "Those children would be better off without you. You brought nothing to this marriage but a pretty face and empty hands. No dowry, no connections, no value. Thomas was a fool to marry beneath him." "I loved him," Clara said quietly, her dignity the only thing she had left. Martha laughed, a harsh sound like crows cawing. Love doesn't put food on the table or wood in the stove. You're worth nothing. Clara Withers, nothing but a burden and a bad memory. Take your brats and go." They'd given her an hour to gather what little belonged to her: a few worn dresses, Thomas's old hunting knife, a dented pot, and the small wooden horse he'd carved for Samuel. Everything else, they claimed, was Withers' property. Even her wedding ring. They'd tried to take, but Clara had hidden it in her mouth until they gave up. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Clara faced an impossible choice. The nearest town was 40 miles through the mountain passes, and winter was showing its teeth. She'd heard whispers of a trading post run by white settlers somewhere in the northern ranges, a place where desperate souls might find work. It was a fool's hope, but it was all she had. "We're going on an adventure," she told the twins, forcing brightness into her voice. "We'll walk through the mountains like brave explorers." Samuel, older by 10 minutes and always the protector, squared his thin shoulders. "I'll help carry things." "Mama." Clara gathered their meager possessions into a cloth bundle. The wind was picking up, and dark clouds rolled over the peaks like a promise of doom. Any sensible person would wait for better weather, but sensible people had homes to wait in. She wrapped the children in every piece of fabric she owned, turning them into small, waddling bundles of cloth. They left as darkness began to creep across the valley. Clara didn't look back at the cabin where she'd spent 3 happy years with Thomas, where the twins had taken their first steps, where laughter had once filled the rooms. That life was dead now, buried under an avalanche of loss and cruelty. The first mile was manageable, following the old trapper's trail that wound between the pines. The twins walked bravely, their small legs pumping with determination. But as they climbed higher, the temperature plummeted, and the wind grew teeth. "Mama, my feet hurt," Sarah whimpered. "Just a little further, sweet one." Clara lied, She had no idea how much further. The trail was becoming harder to follow as snow began to fall. Fat flakes that quickly became a curtain of white. By the time they reached Skull Ridge, the storm had become a monster. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontally across their path. Clara could barely see 3 feet ahead. The twins were stumbling now, exhaustion and cold taking their toll. "We need shelter," she muttered, though her words were swallowed by the storm. Through the white chaos, she spotted a cluster of pines that might offer some protection. Half carrying, half dragging the children, she fought toward them. That's when Sarah fell. The little girl simply crumpled, her strength finally spent. Clara dropped to her knees, gathering her daughter against her chest. Samuel pressed against her other side, and she wrapped her arms around both children, trying to shield them with her body. "Please," she whispered to the merciless sky. "Please, not my babies. Take me if you must, but not them." The cold was seeping into her bones now, a deadly lethargy that whispered of sleep. Clara knew what it meant. She'd seen frozen corpses before, their faces peaceful, as if death had come as a gentle friend. She pressed her lips to Samuel's forehead, then Sarah's, tasting the salt of her own tears. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I'm so sorry. Mama tried so hard." Her vision was blurring, darkness creeping in from the edges. The children were so still in her arms, their breathing shallow. Clara's last coherent thought was a prayer, not for herself, but for their innocent souls. Let them wake in a warmer place. She begged the God who seemed to have abandoned them. Let them know they were loved. As consciousness faded, Clara thought she saw a shadow moving through the storm, massive, dark against the white fury of the blizzard. Death coming to collect them, perhaps, or maybe just her eyes playing tricks as they failed. She tightened her grip on her children one last time and surrendered to the darkness. The shadow drew closer, and had Clara been conscious, she would have seen it was no phantom but a man, huge, bearded, wrapped in furs like some primitive giant. He moved through the storm as if it were a summer breeze, his steps sure despite the treacherous ground. When he found them, a woman curled around 2 small forms, all 3 still as death. He didn't hesitate. With movements both gentle and efficient, he gathered all 3 against his chest, the woman and children weighing no more than a deer carcass to his massive strength. Then he turned back into the storm, carrying Clara Withers and her twins away from death and toward a destiny none of them could have imagined. Warmth. That was Clara's first conscious thought. Impossible. Wonderful warmth that seemed to seep into her frozen bones like honey. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at rough-hewn wooden beams, firelight dancing across them in shifting patterns. She was lying on something soft, a real bed with actual blankets, not the thin pallet she'd grown accustomed to. Memory crashed back like a physical blow. The storm. The children. Samuel, Sarah! She bolted upright, or tried to. Pain lanced through her body, and dizziness forced her back down. Easy. The voice was deep, rough as tree bark. Clara turned her head to see a man sitting in a chair by the fireplace, his massive frame making the furniture look child-sized. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that hung past his shoulders and a beard that hadn't seen a razor in months. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter storm clouds, holding a weariness that spoke of too much seen, too much endured. "My children!" Clara gasped, struggling again to rise. The man jerked his head toward the corner. There, wrapped in thick buffalo robes near the fire, lay Samuel and Sarah. Their cheeks were pink with warmth, chests rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Relief hit Clara so hard she nearly wept. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, sir. I was certain we would." "Die," he finished bluntly. "You nearly did. Another hour in that storm and I'd have been digging graves come spring." His manner was brusque, almost hostile, but his actions told a different story. Clara noticed the pot simmering over the fire, the neat pile of additional blankets near the bed, the way the children had been carefully positioned to receive maximum warmth. I'm Clara Withers, she offered softly. Those are my twins, Samuel and Sarah. We're grateful for your kindness. The man stood abruptly, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Gideon Holt, and it's not kindness. Just didn't feel like stepping over frozen corpses every time I go hunting. He moved to the pot, ladling something into a wooden bowl. You need to eat. Been out for near a day. A day? Clara's hand went to her throat, finding it bare. My things. On the table. Gideon set the bowl beside her with surprising gentleness for such large hands. What little you had, including that bundle of rags you called supplies. His tone was harsh, but Clara caught something else in it, a reluctant concern. She managed to sit up this time, accepting the bowl gratefully. It was venison stew, simple but rich, and her empty stomach cramped with need. As she ate, she studied her surroundings. The cabin was larger than it appeared, built with skill and care. Furs lined the walls for insulation, and shelves held supplies in neat order. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. You a trapper? She asked between spoonfuls. Hunter, trapper, whatever pays. Gideon had returned to his chair, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. Real question is what a woman with 2 babies is doing in the mountains during a blizzard. You running from the law? From family, Clara admitted. My husband's family. After Thomas died, they took everything. Said I was worthless, threw us out. She lifted her chin slightly. I was heading for the northern trading post, hoping to find work. Gideon snorted. In winter? With babies? That's not desperate. That's stupid. The words stung, but Clara couldn't argue their truth. What choice did I have? Stay and watch my children starve? Could have found a man. Widow with your looks wouldn't have trouble. I buried my husband 3 months ago. Clara interrupted, steel entering her voice. I'm not looking to replace him for convenience. Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or a grudging respect. He set the rifle aside and leaned back. Well, you're here now. Storm won't break for days, maybe a week. After that, he shrugged. After that, you'll move on. Of course. Clara agreed quickly. We won't impose. I can work for our keep. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Don't need a woman's work. He cut her off. Got along fine for 5 years without it. 5 years alone in these mountains. Clara wondered what had driven him to such isolation, but didn't dare ask. Instead, she finished her stew and carefully set the bowl aside. Still, I won't take charity. I'll earn our keep somehow. Samuel stirred then, his eyes opening with the unfocused confusion of deep sleep. When he saw the strange surroundings, he immediately looked for his mother. Mama? I'm here, sweetheart. Clara tried to rise, but Gideon was already moving. He crouched beside the boy, still intimidating despite the gesture, and spoke gruffly. Your mama's hurt. Needs to rest. You hungry, boy? Samuel nodded, eyes wide as saucers as he stared up at this giant of a man. Gideon ladled stew into 2 more bowls, and soon both twins were eating with the single-minded focus of children who'd known hunger. Mister, Sarah said between bites. Are you a bear? Clara flushed. Sarah, mind your manners. But Gideon's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. No, little one, just big as one. Do you live here all alone? Samuel asked. Don't you get scared? Samuel, Clara warned, but Gideon waved her off. Nothing out here scarier than people, he said, and something in his tone made Clara shiver. Finish your food. As the day wore on, Clara discovered that Gideon Holt was a study in contradictions. He'd bark at her for trying to help, insisting she rest, then spend patient minutes showing Samuel how to bank a fire properly. He claimed to want them gone, yet had clearly spent hours preparing the cabin for their comfort. He avoided looking at her directly, but she'd catch him watching when he thought she wasn't aware. Night fell early in the mountains, and with it came an awkward sleeping arrangement. The cabin had only 1 bed and the floor space near the fire. Gideon solved it by announcing he'd take the chair, giving the bed to Clara and the warm floor to the children. You can't sleep in a chair, Clara protested. You're too large. Slept in worse places. He replied curtly. Don't concern yourself with my comfort. Clara lay awake long after the children's breathing deepened into sleep. Through the dim firelight, she could see Gideon's profile, harsh and craggy as the mountains themselves. He wasn't sleeping either. She could tell by the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the chair arms. Around midnight, Sarah began crying softly in her sleep, before Clara could move. Gideon was there, his huge hand gentle on the child's forehead. Shh, little one, just dreams. You're safe. Sarah settled, and Gideon returned to his chair. But Clara had seen the practiced way he'd soothed the child, the unconscious tenderness. This man had been a father once. How long? She asked softly into the darkness. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 6 years. Cholera took my Beth and our boy while I was away fighting in the war. Came home to Graves. The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, like a badly healed wound. Clara understood that pain, the way it lived in your chest like a second heartbeat. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't want your pity. It's not pity, it's understanding. He turned then, and even in the dim light, she could see the rawness in his eyes. That why you really ran? Not just because they threw you out? Clara considered lying, but something about the darkness and shared grief made honesty easier. They wanted to separate us, said the twins would be better off parceled out to proper families, families with fathers. Her voice broke slightly. I'd rather die in the mountains than lose them too. Gideon nodded slowly. Then you're not as stupid as I thought, just desperate in a different way. It was, Clara realized, almost a compliment. She pulled the blankets higher, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke. Mr. Holt, thank you. Whatever you say about not wanting us here, you saved our lives. That matters. He didn't respond, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. But inside the cabin, 3 rescued souls and 1 reluctant savior settled into an uneasy peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Clara could see that in every line of Gideon's resistant posture. But tonight, they were warm and safe and alive. It was enough. For now. It was everything. The storm broke after 5 days, leaving the world transformed into crystalline white. Clara stood at the window, marveling at the pristine beauty, while dreading what it meant. Their time in this strange sanctuary was ending. Behind her, Gideon sharpened his hunting knife with slow, deliberate strokes. I'll take you to Elk Ridge tomorrow, he said without looking up. From there, you can make it to the trading post in a day's walk. Clara's heart sank, though she'd known this was coming. Of course, we'll be ready. But Samuel chose that moment to sneeze violently, followed by a wet, rattling cough. Clara was at his side instantly, feeling his forehead, burning hot. Mama, my throat hurts, the boy whispered. Gideon set down his knife. In 3 strides, he was beside them, his hand replacing Clara's on Samuel's forehead. His frown deepened. Lung fever. Seen it before. He moved to his shelves, pulling down various dried herbs. Boy can't travel, not for at least a week, maybe 2. Clara bit her lip. We've imposed enough. You want to kill him? Gideon's voice was harsh. Take him out in this cold with lung fever. He'll be dead before you reach the valley. He began mixing herbs with practiced efficiency. You'll stay until he's well. No discussion. And so their temporary arrangement stretched on. Clara threw herself into helping however Gideon would allow, determined to earn their extended keep. At first, her attempts were disasters. She burned the venison stew, nearly set fire to her skirt at the hearth, and somehow managed to break his only clay mug. Lord help me, Gideon muttered after she accidentally knocked over his neat stack of firewood. Were you raised by wolves? Woman. I was raised by a schoolmarm in Boston. Clara shot back, embarrassed and frustrated. We had servants and gas lamps in stores, Forgive me for not knowing how to live uh, like a mountain man." His tone was mocking, but she caught a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Fine. You want to help? Really help? Then learn." What followed was an education unlike anything Clara had received in her proper Boston upbringing. Gideon taught with gruff patience, showing her how to bank a fire so it would last through the night, how to identify which wood burned hot and which smoked. He demonstrated the proper way to skin a rabbit. Quick and clean, don't let it suffer. How to stretch and cure the hide. How to use every part of the animal. Wasteful. He grunted when she tried to throw away the bones. Those make broth. Marrow's good eating. Out here, everything has use. Clara learned to cook over an open fire without burning everything. To judge temperature by holding her hand at the right distance. She learned to melt snow for water efficiently, to recognize the signs of coming weather in the wind and clouds. "See how the smoke rises straight?" Gideon pointed one morning. "Means fair weather, starts hanging low. Storm's coming." The twins, with the resilience of children, adapted quickly. Sarah followed Gideon around like a devoted shadow, chattering constantly despite his taciturn nature. Samuel, once he recovered from his fever, proved eager to learn everything the mountain man could teach. "Can you show me to set a snare, Mr. Gideon?" the boy asked one afternoon. "Just Gideon," came the gruff reply. "And you're too young for snares, but I'll show you tracks. Man needs to know what shares his mountain." They came back hours later. Samuel's eyes bright with excitement as he recounted every track they'd seen. Deer, elk, rabbit, even a mountain cat. Gideon looked uncomfortable with the boy's enthusiasm, but answered every rapid-fire question with patience Clara wouldn't have expected. "Your beard is scratchy," Sarah announced one evening, reaching up to pat Gideon's face as he sat by the fire. "Like a porcupine." "Sarah!" Clara scolded, but Gideon's mouth twitched. "That's so. Little mite? Well, porcupines are dangerous. Best keep your distance." "You're not dangerous," Sarah said confidently. "You're nice. You just pretend to be mean." Gideon went very still, and Clara held her breath. Then he carefully lifted the little girl off his lap and set her down. "Time for bed," he said roughly, but his hand was gentle as it briefly touched Sarah's hair. It was moments like these that confused Clara. The man who claimed to want them gone was the same one who carved wooden animals for the twins in the evening, who noticed when Clara shivered and wordlessly added another fur to her bed, who stayed up all night when Samuel's fever spiked again. One morning, Clara rose early to find Gideon already gone hunting. She assumed. She decided to surprise him by organizing his stores, which had become somewhat scattered with their presents, behind sacks of flour and dried beans. She found an oilcloth bundle. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she carefully unwrapped it. Inside were a woman's hair combs, delicate and beautiful. A small daguerreotype showed a pretty woman with kind eyes holding a baby, letters tied with ribbon, a child's wooden top, and at the bottom, a cavalry pistol with 2 bullets, names etched into them, Josiah Mills and Ezra Tanner. "What are you doing?" Clara spun, dropping the bundle. Gideon filled the doorway, his face dark with fury. "I'm sorry, I was just cleaning." "You had no right." His voice was low, dangerous. "No right to touch those. I'm sorry," Clara repeated, genuinely distressed. "I didn't mean—" "Get out." He turned away. "Storm's past. Trail's clear. Take your children and go." Clara felt tears sting her eyes, but anger flared too. "So that's it? One mistake and we're thrown out again, just like Thomas's family?" Gideon whirled on her. "Don't you dare compare me to—" He stopped, breathing hard. "To what? To people who judge without listening? Who shut others out because it's easier than letting them in?" Clara stepped closer, despite the danger radiating from him. "I've seen you with my children. Gideon Holt, I've seen the gentleness you try to hide. Whatever those names on those bullets mean, whatever pain you're carrying, it doesn't make you the monster you think you are. You don't know what I've done," he said hoarsely. "Then tell me." The story came in halting pieces, pulled from him like splinters. How he'd gone to war, leaving Beth and baby James. How he'd made friends in his unit, Josiah and Ezra, good men he'd trusted. how they deserted near the war's end, turning to raiding, how he'd come home to find his family dead of cholera and his home burned, only to learn later that his former brothers-in-arms had been there first. They'd found Beth alone, sick and defenseless. They hurt her, Gideon said, the words scraping raw. Before the sickness took her, neighbors found her, said she kept asking for me, saying I'd come. His hands clenched. I hunted them for 2 years, found them in Colorado, made them pay. Clara said nothing, just moved closer until she could lay her hand over his clenched fist. His hands were shaking. Now you know, he said bitterly. I'm a killer, a man who couldn't protect his own family. You should take your children far from here. I know you're a man who loved his wife, Clara said softly, who carries grief and guilt like mountains on his shoulders, who saved 3 strangers in a blizzard and carved toys for children who aren't his, who teaches and protects and provides, even while claiming not to care. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm not afraid of you, Gideon. He looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the intensity of his gaze, at the war she could see raging behind those storm-gray eyes. You should be, he said roughly, but he didn't pull his hand away. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara found Gideon standing outside, looking at the stars. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him. Beth loved the stars, he said without preamble. Said they were God's promises, shining in the dark. She sounds wonderful. She was. He glanced at her. Thomas, was he good to you? Yes. Clara smiled at the memory. He was gentle, kind, a dreamer, always talking about the fortune he'd make, the grand house he'd build me. He never did understand that I didn't need grand, just him. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 souls marked by loss, finding unexpected solace in shared understanding. I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow, Gideon said suddenly. Woman alone needs to defend herself. Does this mean we're staying? He was quiet for a long moment. Until spring, mountains are treacherous in winter, and the boy's still weak. Come spring, he shrugged. We'll see. Clara knew better than to push. Thank you, she said simply. As she turned to go inside, Gideon's voice stopped her. Clara, I'm glad you found those things. Been a long time since anyone knew the whole truth. She looked back at him, this bear of a man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what lay beyond them. We all have our ghosts. Gideon, maybe it's time to stop letting them win. Inside, she checked on the sleeping children, then prepared her own bed. Through the window, she could see Gideon still standing under the stars, a solitary figure slowly learning he might not have to be alone anymore. Winter deepened its hold on the mountains, and with it came an unexpected rhythm to their days. Clara found herself anticipating the sound of Gideon's boots on the porch each morning, the way he'd grunt his approval when she had coffee ready. Small gestures began to appear, a handful of winter berries left by her plate, fresh pine boughs to brighten the cabin, a new shawl of rabbit fur that appeared on her bed without explanation. You're spoiling them, Clara said one afternoon, watching Gideon show Samuel how to whistle like different birds. The boy's face glowed with concentration and hero worship. Boy needs skills, Gideon muttered, but his ears reddened slightly. Sarah had claimed Gideon's lap as her personal territory during evening story times. Clara would read from the one book Gideon owned, a worn Bible that had been Beth's, while Sarah played with the carved animals, making up elaborate adventures. Gideon would sit still as stone, but Clara noticed how his large hand would steady the child when she tilted too far, how his expression softened when Sarah's head eventually drooped against his chest in sleep. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that Clara made a discovery. She'd been mending one of Gideon's shirts by lamplight when Sarah knocked over the sewing basket. As Clara bent to retrieve the scattered items, her hand found a small wooden box beneath the bed, hidden behind other supplies. Leave it, Gideon said sharply, but it was too late. The box had opened, revealing more carved figures, Dozens of them. Animals, people, tiny furniture, an entire miniature world created by patient hands during lonely winters. "These are beautiful," Clara breathed, lifting a delicate deer. "You made all of these?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Pass the time, nothing more." But Clara saw the truth in the careful detail, the love carved into every piece. "This was for James, wasn't it? You were making him a whole world to play with." Something broke in Gideon's expression. He stood abruptly, nearly displacing Sarah, and strode outside into the cold. Clara settled the children and followed, finding him standing rigid by the woodpile. "You think I don't know it's foolish?" he said harshly. "Carving toys for a boy 6 years dead? But I couldn't stop. Every winter, I'd think just one more. Like maybe if I finished enough of them, he'd—" His voice cracked. Clara moved closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold. "It's not foolish. It's love. Love doesn't die just because I failed them." He turned on her, eyes wild with old pain. "Because I chose glory and brotherhood over staying home? Because I—" Clara reached up and placed her fingers gently over his mouth, stopping the flow of self-hatred. "Because terrible things happen, and we survive them even when we think we can't. Because going on living isn't a betrayal of the dead, it's the only way to honor them." He stood frozen for a moment. Then his hands came up to frame her face, work-roughened thumbs trembling against her cheeks. "Clara," he said, her name a broken prayer. She should have stepped back, should have remembered she was a recent widow, that this was temporary, that 100 reasons made this unwise. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her own hands coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. "I see you," she whispered. "Not just the mountain man, not just the grieving widower. I see Gideon Holt, who is gentle with children and creates beauty with his hands, and carries more love in his heart than he knows what to do with." He made a sound like a wounded animal and pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. They stood that way for long minutes, two damaged souls holding each other up against the weight of memory and loss. When they finally returned to the cabin, something had shifted between them. Gideon resumed his chair with Sarah, but his eyes found Clara's across the room, holding promises and fears in equal measure. The next morning brought new snow, and with it a different kind of lesson. Gideon set up targets against a distant tree and handed Clara his rifle. "It's too heavy," she protested, struggling with the weight. "Pistol's no good at range. Rifle saves lives." He moved behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her stance. "Stock tight against your shoulder. Breathe in, half out, squeeze gentle-like." Clara was acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, the warmth of his body blocking the wind. When she fired and missed wildly, he chuckled, the first time she'd heard him truly laugh. "You flinched, afraid of the gun or afraid of me?" She turned in his arms to glare up at him. "Neither." His eyes darkened, dropping to her mouth. "Maybe you should be." But it was Gideon who stepped back, clearing his throat roughly. "Again, and this time, don't close your eyes." As winter wore on, Clara improved with the rifle and learned to set simple snares. She could now identify edible plants that grew even in winter, knew how to read weather signs, how to move quietly through the forest. The children thrived under Gideon's patient teaching, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. But it was the nights that were changing most profoundly. After the children slept, Clara and Gideon would sit by the fire, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood in Ohio, his father's strict hand and mother's gentle nature. He learned about her unusual education, her physician father who'd believed in teaching his daughter to read and think. "Is that why Thomas married you?" Gideon asked one night. "Because you were educated?" Clara smiled sadly. "Thomas married me because I laughed at his terrible jokes and didn't mind that he had more dreams than sense. His family was horrified, said I'd trapped him with my Boston wiles, whatever those are." "Their loss," Gideon said quietly. "Man would be lucky to be trapped by you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Sarah cried out in her sleep. The moment passed, but the charge in the air remained. It came to a head on a night when the children were sleeping deeper than usual, tired from a day of playing in fresh snow. Clara was putting away the dishes when she became aware of Gideon watching her, his gaze intent and hungry. "You should go to bed," he said roughly. "Should I?" She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "Clara." Her name was a warning, but she heard the want beneath it. She crossed to where he sat, standing between his spread knees. His hands came up automatically to rest on her waist, and she felt them tremble. "I'm not a good man," he said hoarsely. "I've got blood on my hands and ghosts in my head. You deserve better than—" She silenced him with a kiss, soft and questioning at first, then deeper as he groaned and pulled her closer. His beard was rough against her skin, his hands gentle but urgent as they tangled in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara saw wonder in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he admitted. "How to be with someone without fear of losing them. Then we'll learn together," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "If you'll have us, if you'll have me." His answer was to kiss her again, and this time there was promise in it, hope for a future neither had dared imagine. When he finally led her to the bed they'd been sharing in shifts, it was with tender reverence, as if she were something precious that might shatter at rough handling. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Clara traced the scars on his chest, marks of battles fought and survived. "I love you," she said simply, feeling the truth of it bone deep. Gideon's arms tightened around her. "I swore I'd never—" After Beth, he struggled for words. "But you and those children, you've brought life back to this place, to me." He pressed his lips to her hair. "I love you too, Clara. God help me. I do." Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, two hearts began the slow, careful work of healing together, of building something new from the ashes of what was lost. The morning after their first night together, Clara woke to find Gideon already up, stoking the fire. When she stirred, he turned to her with an expression so tender it made her heart catch. "Morning," he said softly, bringing her coffee, a luxury he'd been saving. Clara sat up, suddenly shy despite their intimacy. "The children? Still sleeping? Snow's coming in heavy. We're locked in for a few days at least." He sat on the bed's edge, his hand finding hers. "No regrets?" "None," she said firmly, twining their fingers together. "You?" Instead of answering, he leaned down to kiss her, gentle and sure. When Sarah's voice called out sleepily, they pulled apart, but the warmth between them remained. What followed were perhaps the happiest weeks Clara had known since Thomas's death. The cabin became a true home, filled with laughter and purpose. Gideon still had his quiet moods, times when the ghosts grew loud, but Clara learned to navigate them, offering silent comfort until he could surface again. One morning, Clara was kneading bread dough, a skill she'd finally mastered, when Gideon appeared behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "You've got flour in your hair," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. She leaned back against him, marveling at how natural this felt. "And you smell like pine sap. Were you checking the traps?" Good haul today. Spring's coming early." His hands tightened briefly. "Clara, we need to talk about—" "Look what I made," Samuel burst in, holding up a small carved bear, under Gideon's tutelage. He'd been learning to whittle. "Do you think it's good enough for Sarah's birthday?" Sarah's 6th birthday was approaching. She'd be 6 on the first day of spring, she'd informed them solemnly. Gideon examined the bear with grave attention. "Good knife work. See here, though. You want to go with the grain, not against it." He guided Samuel's hands, showing the proper technique. Clara watched them, her heart full. This was what she wanted, not just for now, but always. The thought of leaving when spring arrived was becoming unbearable. That night, as they lay together after the children slept, Gideon finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Snow's melting fast. Trail will be clear in a few weeks." His voice was carefully neutral. You still planning on the trading post? Clara turned in his arms to face him. Is that what you want? For us to leave? What I want, he struggled with the words. What I want is to keep you here forever. Build on another room for the children. Teach Samuel to hunt proper. Watch Sarah grow up. His voice roughened. But that's selfish. You deserve better than a broken-down soldier hiding in the mountains. Gideon Holt, Clara said firmly. You listen to me. You're not broken. You're healing. We both are. And there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here with you. He searched her face in the dim light. You mean that? You'd stay? Be a mountain man's woman? I'd be your woman, she corrected. Your wife. If you'll have me, the children already think of you as... He kissed her deeply, desperately. Yes, he breathed against her lips. God, yes, marry me, Clara. Let me be their father. Let me try again. They made plans that night, whispered promises and practical considerations intertwined. Gideon would take her to the trading post, but only to buy supplies and find someone to marry them proper. They'd return to the cabin, expand it, make it truly theirs. You sure you won't miss town life? He asked. It's not easy out here. I've learned that, Clara said wryly. But town life wasn't easy either, just difficult in different ways. Here, we're free. The children are happy. And I have you. The next morning brought the promised early spring thaw. Gideon announced they'd make the trip to the trading post in a week, and the cabin buzzed with preparation. Clara mended and cleaned their clothes while Gideon prepared furs to trade. The children could barely contain their excitement at the prospect of seeing other people again. But their happiness was interrupted 3 days before the planned departure. Clara was teaching Sarah her letters while Gideon and Samuel checked traps when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, which was unusual this far into the mountains. She grabbed the rifle as Gideon had taught her, positioning herself by the window. Her heart sank as she recognized the lead rider, Jacob Withers, Thomas's brother, accompanied by 4 other men. Clara, Jacob called out. We know you're in there. Took some time to track you down. But a woman with twins doesn't just disappear. Sarah whimpered, and Clara pulled her close. Stay quiet, sweetheart. Come out peaceful-like. Another man shouted, We're here to collect what belongs to the family, namely those children. Clara's mind raced. Gideon and Samuel were at least an hour away. She was alone with Sarah and vastly outnumbered. The children stay with me, she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. Jacob laughed. An ugly sound. Court order says different. Unfit mother, abandoning family property, taking up with some hermit. You've lost any claim to them. That's a lie. Maybe, but who's going to argue? You're not even legally married to whoever's keeping you up here. His voice turned sly. Though from what we hear, that won't be a problem much longer. Gideon Holt's got quite a bounty on his head. Murder's still murder, even if the victims were trash. Clara's blood ran cold. A bounty. Of course. Justice didn't care about the why of things, only the what. Now then, Jacob continued. You send those children out, and maybe we don't need to tell the law exactly where to find their murdering friend. Clara made a decision. Sarah, she whispered urgently. Remember the hiding place Gideon showed you? The one for playing? Sarah nodded, eyes wide. Go there, now. Don't come out until Gideon or I come for you. Run! Sarah scrambled through the back window Clara opened for her, disappearing into the forest. Clara watched until she was sure the child was hidden, then turned back to the front door. I'm coming out, she called. Don't shoot. She emerged slowly, rifle in plain view but not aimed. The men dismounted, spreading out to surround her. Where's the other one? Jacob demanded. The boy? With Gideon, checking traps. Clara lifted her chin. You'll not take them, either of them. See, that's where you're wrong. One of the men, wearing a deputy's badge, stepped forward. I've got legal papers. And if I happen to find Gideon Holt while I'm here, well, that bounty will set me up nice. He's done nothing wrong, Clara said fiercely. Those men he killed, murdered. The deputy corrected. In cold blood. Way I heard it. Man can't take the law into his own hands, no matter the cause. They were so focused on her that they didn't hear Gideon's approach. But Clara saw him, melting out of the forest like a shadow. Samuel pushed behind a tree for safety. His face was stone, but his eyes burned as they took in the scene. "Looking for me?" he said quietly, and 5 guns swung toward him. "Gideon, no!" Clara started forward, but Jacob grabbed her arm roughly. Well, the murderer himself." The deputy's hand hovered near his pistol. "Gideon Holt, you're under arrest for the murders of Josiah Mills and Ezra Tanner." "Those men raped and killed my wife," Gideon said, his voice deadly calm. "They burned my home. Save it for the judge." The deputy nodded to his men. "Take him." What happened next was blur. One of the men reached for Gideon, who moved faster than thought. A struggle, a gun going off. When the dust settled, one of Jacob's men lay groaning on the ground, clutching his shoulder. "Nobody else needs to bleed," Gideon said, now holding the wounded man's gun. "Take your man and go. The children stay. You just added assault to your charges," the deputy said. "Maybe attempted murder. Then I've got nothing to lose." Gideon's smile was all teeth. "I spent 3 years killing for my country. You think I can't handle 5 soft townsmen?" It was a standoff, tension wire-tight. Then Sarah's scream pierced the air. Everyone turned to see her being dragged from the forest by another man, a 6th rider who'd circled around. "Got the girl!" he called triumphantly. Gideon's face went white. In that moment of distraction, the deputy drew and fired. Gideon spun with the impact, dropping to one knee. Blood bloomed across his shirt. "No!" Clara broke free from Jacob, running to Gideon. She pressed her hands against the wound, tears streaming. No, not again. I can't lose you too." Gideon's hand covered hers, slick with blood. Take the children! Run!" "I won't leave you." Around them, chaos erupted as Samuel burst from hiding, launching himself at the man holding Sarah. The twins fought with savage determination, and in the confusion, Sarah broke free again. "Enough!" the deputy shouted. "Holt, you're coming with us. Dead or alive, makes no difference to me." Clara looked up at him, her hands still pressed to Gideon's wound. "Then you'll have to go through me first." "And me!" Samuel planted himself in front of Gideon, fists clenched. "Me too!" Sarah ran to join them, her small face fierce. They stood there, a makeshift family united against the world, a wounded man, a desperate woman, and 2 small children willing to fight for the home they'd found. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Clara kept pressure on Gideon's wound, feeling his blood seep warm between her fingers. The deputy and his men had their guns drawn, but something in the fierce unity of the small family before them gave them pause. "This is foolishness," Jacob spat. "Move aside. Clara, you're already unfit. Don't add harboring a fugitive to your sins." "My only sin was believing your family had hearts." Clara shot back. "Thomas would be ashamed of you." Jacob's face darkened. "Don't you dare speak his name. You killed him sure as if you'd pushed him into that avalanche yourself. If he hadn't been trying to provide for a worthless—" His words were cut off as Gideon struggled to rise, using his rifle as support. Clara tried to hold him down, but his eyes were fixed on Jacob with deadly intent. "You say one more word against her," Gideon growled. "And bounty or no bounty, you'll be joining Mills and Tanner." Threatening a witness now? The deputy seemed almost pleased. "You're making this easy. Holt." "Wait." A new voice interrupted. From the tree line emerged an older man Clara recognized. Henderson, who ran the trading post. With him were 3 other men, all armed. "What's all this about?" "None of your concern, old man." The deputy said, "Official business." Henderson ignored him, his eyes taking in the scene. Gideon bleeding. Clara's desperate grip. The children's protective stance. "Seems to me it is my concern." Gideon Holt's been trading fair with me for 5 years, never caused trouble, and this lady and her young ones deserve better than being manhandled by a bunch of thugs. We have legal papers, Jacob insisted, waving the documents. Let me see those. Henderson examined them, then snorted. These aren't worth the paper they're written on. No judge's seal, no proper witness. You forged these yourself. Withers? Jacob's flush gave him away. The children belong with family. The children belong with their mother, Henderson said firmly. And from what I can see, she's made them a good home here. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. There's still the matter of the bounty. Holt killed 2 men who deserved killing, from what I heard. One of Henderson's companions said, "My brother was in Holt's unit during the war. Said Mills and Tanner were the worst kind of scum, even before they deserted. The law is the law," the deputy insisted, but his conviction was wavering. "And sometimes the law's wrong," Henderson replied. "You want to drag a war hero to hang for avenging his murdered family? You want to orphan these children again for what, a bounty that probably expired years ago?" Clara felt Gideon's sway and tightened her grip. His face was gray, and she could feel his strength failing. "Please," she said, looking directly at the deputy. "He saved our lives. He gave us a home when everyone else turned us away. Whatever he did in the past, he's a good man now. The children need him. I need him." Sarah broke away from Samuel and approached the deputy, tugging on his coat. "Please don't take him away. Mister, he teaches us things and makes us toys and keeps the scary dreams away. He's our papa now." The deputy looked down at the little girl, then at his men, clearly wrestling with duty and conscience. The wounded man was still groaning on the ground, adding urgency to the situation. "I didn't see any Gideon Holt," Henderson said meaningfully. "I saw a family man named, let's say Gabriel Holmes, living peaceful with his wife and children. Anybody else see different?" His men shook their heads. "Nope, not a thing. Just a family minding their own business." The deputy holstered his gun with obvious relief. "Get Porter on his horse." He ordered his men. "We're leaving." "What about the children?" Jacob demanded. "What children?" The deputy fixed him with a hard stare. "I don't see any abandoned children here. I see a family. And if I find out you've been forging legal documents, Withers, you'll be the one facing charges." As the men prepared to leave, the deputy paused near Clara. "Get him to a doctor," he said quietly. "And maybe think about moving on. Not everyone will be so understanding." Clara nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you." The group mounted up, Jacob shooting venomous looks, but clearly outnumbered and outmaneuvered. As they rode away, Clara heard him snarl something about not being finished, but she couldn't care about future threats now. "Inside," Henderson commanded. "Taking charge. Let's see to that wound." Together, they got Gideon into the cabin. He was barely conscious now, his skin clammy with shock. Henderson, who apparently had some medical knowledge from his years on the frontier, examined the wound with practiced hands. "Bullet went through clean," he announced. "Missed anything vital, but he's lost a lot of blood. Need to clean it, stitch it up." What followed was a nightmare of pain and fear. Clara held Gideon's hand as Henderson worked, while his men kept the children occupied outside. Gideon drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for Beth, sometimes clutching Clara's hand with desperate strength. "Don't leave me," he mumbled at one point, his eyes finding hers with difficulty. "Can't lose, not again." "I'm here," Clara promised, smoothing his sweat-dampened hair. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with us now. Gideon Holt." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Gabriel Holmes," he corrected weakly. Better name for a family man." Henderson finished his work as darkness fell. "He'll live," he pronounced. "But it'll be a hard few days. Fever's likely. You'll need to watch him close." "I will." Clara squeezed Henderson's weathered hand. "How can we ever thank you?" the old trader shrugged. "Been watching Gideon for years, seen him slowly dying inside, turning into a ghost. Then you folks showed up, And suddenly, he's buying extra supplies, asking about fabric and toys. He smiled. Man deserves a second chance at happiness. We all do. After Henderson and his men left, promising to check back in a few days, Clara settled the children for the night. They were reluctant to leave Gideon's side, but exhaustion eventually won. "Is he going to die like Papa did?" Samuel asked quietly, his young face etched with fear. "No," Clara said firmly. "He's strong, and he has us to fight for. He's going to be fine." That night began a vigil that would last 3 days. The fever came as Henderson predicted, raging through Gideon's body like wildfire. He thrashed and called out, reliving battles and losses. Clara bathed his face with cool water, forced willow bark tea between his lips, and talked to him constantly. "You listen to me, Gideon Holt," she said during the worst of it, when his breathing turned shallow and labored. "You don't get to leave us now. Not when we've just found each other. Not when the children finally have a father who loves them." She told him about their future, the room they'd add for the children, the garden she'd plant come summer, the life they'd build together. She told him she loved him, over and over, until her voice grew hoarse. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara woke from an exhausted doze to find Gideon's eyes open and clear, watching her. "Clara," he said, his voice rusty but aware. "Oh, thank God." She kissed him carefully, mindful of his weakness. "You came back to us." "Had to," he managed. Promised to marry you proper." Clara laughed through her tears. "Is that a proposal, Gabriel Holmes?" "It is." His hand found hers, weak but steady. "Will you have me, broken parts and all?" "Yes," she said simply. "Forever, yes." The children burst in then, having heard voices, and the cabin filled with joyful chaos. Sarah climbed carefully onto the bed, patting Gideon's face with gentle hands. "You scared us," she scolded. "Don't do that again." "I'll try not to, little mite," Gideon promised solemnly. Samuel stood by the bedside, trying to be grown up, but with tears tracking down his cheeks. "We protected you," he said proudly. "Just like you taught us. We're a family, and families protect each other." Gideon's eyes filled. "Yes," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "We are a family." As Clara prepared a strengthening broth, she reflected on the strange paths that had led them here. A widow, fleeing with nothing. A broken man hiding from the world. 2 children who needed love and stability. Separately, they'd been fragments. Together, they were becoming whole. The threat of Jacob and his false claims still lingered, and the question of the bounty remained unresolved. But for now, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. They were home. Outside. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing new growth and fresh possibilities. And inside the cabin, a family forged in hardship and sealed in love began to heal. One day at a time. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. Gideon grew stronger each day, though Clara had to practically tie him to the bed to keep him from resuming his duties too soon. The children helped with the simpler chores, proud to be contributing while their protector healed. But Clara knew their mountain sanctuary couldn't shield them forever. Jacob's threats haunted her dreams, and the question of the bounty hung over them like a storm cloud. When Gideon was finally well enough to travel, she made a decision. "We need to go to town," she announced one morning. "To Mercy's Bend." Gideon looked up sharply from where he was teaching Samuel to oil leather. "That's the last place we should go. It's exactly where we need to go." Clara squared her shoulders. "We can't live in fear, always looking over our shoulders. If there's a bounty, we face it. If Jacob's spreading lies, we counter them with truth. Clara, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand." She moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his rough hands in hers. "I won't have our children growing up in hiding. I won't have you flinching every time a stranger appears. We're going to face this, together, in the open." Gideon studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You know what they'll say, what they'll think of you, living with me, unmarried. Then we'll marry first, Clara said practically. Henderson mentioned a circuit preacher who comes through the trading post. We'll stop there, make it legal, then continue to town. And if they arrest me anyway? Clara's chin lifted. Then I'll fight. The children will fight. We've already proven we will. Something shifted in Gideon's expression, pride mixing with fear, love overwhelming both. You're the bravest woman I've ever known. Clara Withers, soon-to-be Holmes. 3 days later, they stood before Preacher Morrison at the trading post, Henderson and his wife serving as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, mended and pressed, with early wildflowers in her hair. Gideon had trimmed his beard and donned his only good shirt. The children stood between them, Samuel holding the ring's simple bands Henderson had procured from his stores. Do you, Gabriel Holmes, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The preacher intoned. Gideon's eyes never left Clara's. I do, with all my heart. Do you, Clara Withers, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, for always. When they kissed as husband and wife, the children cheered, and even gruff Henderson wiped his eyes. But the celebration was muted by what lay ahead. After a night at the trading post, they set out for Mercy's Bend. The town hadn't changed much in the months since Clara had fled. The same buildings lined the muddy main street. The same faces peered from windows as their small party rode in. But now Clara rode beside her husband, her children secure, her head high. Whispers followed them down the street. She caught fragments. The widow Withers, living in sin. That killer Holt? But she also heard other voices, surprised and speculative. Looks well fed. Children seem happy. Maybe we were wrong. They went first to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Patterson, a fair man by reputation, looked up in surprise as they entered. Mrs. Withers. Or should I say Mrs. Holmes now. He'd clearly heard the gossip. And you'd be Gideon Holt. Gabriel Holmes. Gideon corrected calmly. We've come to clear the air. Sheriff, I hear there's been talk of bounties and kidnapped children. Patterson leaned back in his chair. Jacob Withers has been making noise. That's true. Claims his brother's children are being held against their will. As for bounties, he pulled out a stack of papers, rifling through them. I've got nothing current on any Gideon Holt. There was something years back, but it expired. Statute of limitations and all that. Clara felt Gideon relax beside her. So, there's no legal claim against my husband? None that I can find. Patterson fixed Gideon with a steady gaze. Of course, if someone were to file new charges, provide witnesses. The only witnesses to what happened with Mills and Tanner are dead. Gideon said quietly, They saw to that when they killed my wife. So, I understand. The sheriff's expression softened slightly. Man's got a right to justice, even if he has to make it himself sometimes. That's not official, you understand. Just personal opinion. What about the children? Clara asked. Jacob's threats. Children look healthy and happy to me. Unless someone can prove neglect or abuse. Patterson shrugged. Parents have rights, and you are their mother. They left the sheriff's office with lighter hearts. But Clara knew the battle wasn't won yet. The court of public opinion could be harsher than any legal judgment. We should go to the general store, she decided. Face them all at once. The store was crowded. Saturday bringing in families from outlying farms. Conversation stopped dead when they entered. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes. Judging, measuring. She spotted Martha Withers near the fabric counter, her face purpling with outrage. How dare you show your face here? Martha hissed. Parading around with your mountain savage, corrupting those poor children? The only corruption my children faced was from people who claimed to be family. Clara interrupted, her voice carrying clearly. People who threw out a widow and 2 babies in winter because they couldn't be bothered with charity. You were nothing. Jacob's voice came from behind a shelf. He emerged, face twisted with anger. Thomas lowered himself marrying you, and look what it brought him. Death and disgrace. Thomas loved me, Clara said steadily. He loved our children. He would be ashamed of how you've treated his family. Family, Martha laughed harshly. "You're no family of ours. You trapped him. Used your wiles." "That's enough." Gideon's voice was quiet, but carried threat like a blade. "You'll speak respectfully to my wife, or not at all." "Your wife!" Jacob sneered. "A rushed marriage to make your sin legitimate. Everyone knows what you've been doing up in those mountains. Everyone knows what you are. Holt, a killer. A hermit who couldn't protect his own family. So now you've stolen another man's—" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara felt Gideon tense beside her, saw his hands curl into fists. But before he could respond, another voice spoke up. "Only thing I know," said Mrs. Garrett, the shopkeeper's wife. "Is that Clara Withers? Sorry." Holmes was a good wife to Thomas, never put on airs despite her education, always helped when folks were sick. "That's true," another woman added. "She helped nurse my Johnny through the fever last winter. No payment asked. And this man—" Henderson had entered the store, flanked by several other men. Has traded fair and honest for years, never cheated, never caused trouble. If he's given Clara and her children a home, that speaks well of him in my book. The tide was turning. Clara could feel it in the shifting glances, the murmurs of reconsideration. But Martha wasn't finished. Pretty words don't change facts. She left town with nothing. Now she's back wearing new clothes. Children fat and happy. What did she trade for that comfort? I wonder. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could speak, Sarah tugged free of her hand. The little girl marched up to Martha, tiny fists planted on her hips. "My mama traded work," she declared. "She learned to make fire and cook rabbit and shoot a gun. She fixes clothes and tells stories and makes medicine from plants. And Gideon, Papa, he teaches us things and makes us toys and never hits even when we're naughty." "That's right," Samuel added, moving to stand by his sister. "We got a real home now. With a mama and papa who love us, that's more than you ever offered." The silence that followed was profound. Then old Mrs. Patterson, the sheriff's mother, cackled from her chair by the stove. "Out of the mouths of babes," she declared. "Seems to me those children know where they're loved, and seems to me that's all that matters." One by one, people began to nod, to murmur agreement. Some even approached Clara, offering tentative congratulations on her marriage. The Withers family found themselves increasingly isolated in their condemnation. "This isn't over," Jacob snarled. "You think you've won? Yes," Gideon said simply. "We've won. We have each other. We have our children. We have our home. You have your hate. See which serves you better in the long run." They made their purchases. Cloth for new clothes. Seeds for the garden Clara planned. Candy for the children, and left with dignity intact. As they loaded their horses, Clara heard footsteps behind them. It was Preacher Morrison, who'd apparently followed them to town. Mrs. Holmes. Mr. Holmes. A word. They waited as he approached, expecting more judgment. Instead, he smiled. "I've been thinking about what I witnessed at your wedding, the love between you, the joy of those children." He glanced back at the store where voices were raised in heated discussion. People fear what they don't understand. A woman who chooses her own path. A man who lives apart from society. These things frighten them. We don't need their approval. Gideon said, "No." The preacher agreed. "But you might find more of it than you expect. Give them time. Let them see what I saw. A family built on love rather than convention. That's a powerful testimony." As they rode out of town, Clara reflected on the day's events. They hadn't conquered every prejudice or silenced every whisper, but they'd stood their ground, spoken their truth, and shown the town who they really were. "You all right?" Gideon asked, noting her thoughtfulness. Clara reached over to squeeze his hand. "More than all right. We faced them together. We didn't hide or run. Mama was brave," Sarah announced from her perch in front of Gideon. "Like a story hero." "You were all brave," Clara said, including Samuel in her smile. "My brave, wonderful family." As they climbed back into the mountains, Clara looked back once at Mercy's bed spread below. She'd return occasionally for supplies. might even rebuild some friendships. But her real life, her true home, waited in a cabin among the pines, where love mattered more than propriety, and family was defined by choice rather than blood. The sun was setting as they reached their clearing, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. The cabin stood welcoming, smoke already rising from the chimney. Henderson had sent his son ahead to start a fire for their return. Home, Samuel sighed contentedly. Home, Gideon agreed, his arm coming around Clara as they paused to look at what they'd built together. And it was. Spring blossomed into summer, bringing with it a peace Clara had almost forgotten could exist. The expanded garden flourished under her care, and the cabin rang with laughter and purpose. Gideon had started building the promised addition 2 small rooms for the children, who were growing fast. But the past, Clara had learned, rarely stayed buried. It came on a hot July afternoon when Gideon was teaching Samuel to track deer. Clara was showing Sarah how to can preserves when she heard horses approaching. Her hand went automatically to the rifle, but she relaxed when she recognized Henderson's distinctive gray mare. The old trader wasn't alone. Beside him rode a woman Clara didn't recognize, elderly but straight-backed, with eyes the same storm gray as Gideon's. "Clara," Henderson said, dismounting slowly. "This here's Mrs. Margaret Holt. She's come a long way to find her son." Clara's heart stopped. Gideon's mother. He'd mentioned her only once, saying he'd left Ohio without word after finding Beth dead, too consumed with rage to think of anything but vengeance. Margaret Holt studied Clara with sharp intelligence. "So you're the woman who brought my son back from the dead?" "Ma'am," Clara managed, suddenly aware of her simple dress and work-worn hands. "Gideon's not here just now, but I can wait." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "I've waited 7 years. A few hours more won't kill me." Clara settled them in the cabin with cool water and what hospitality she could manage. Her mind raced. What would Gideon do when he found his mother here? Would he welcome her or retreat into his protective shell? "You have a lovely home," Margaret observed, taking in the careful touches Clara had added. Wildflowers in a jar, the children's drawings on the walls, Gideon's carvings displayed on a shelf. "Thank you. We've been happy here." "Happy." Margaret repeated the word like she was tasting it. "I'd almost given up hope of him finding that again. After Beth and little James." She paused, composing herself. "I got word he'd killed those men. Then he vanished. I thought I'd lost him too." "How did you find us?" "Wasn't easy, but a mother doesn't give up. I hired men to track him, followed rumors and whispers. Finally heard about a hermit in the Wyoming mountains who'd taken in a widow and her children." Her eyes found Clara's. "Knew it had to be him. My Gideon always had a soft heart for those in need, even when he tried to hide it." Before Clara could respond, she heard Samuel's excited voice outside. "And Papa says if I'm real quiet, I might see a buck tomorrow." The door burst open, Samuel still chattering while Gideon followed, carrying the rabbits they'd caught. He stopped dead when he saw his mother, the color draining from his face. "Hello, son," Margaret said quietly. The rabbits fell from Gideon's nerveless fingers. "Ma? 7 years. Gideon, 7 years without a word. Did you think I wouldn't look for you?" He seemed to shrink, the strong mountain man becoming a lost son. "I couldn't come home, not after what I'd done, not after failing them." Margaret rose and crossed to him in 3 swift strides. Before he could retreat, she'd pulled his head down and wrapped her arms around him, fierce as any mother bear. "You listen to me, Gideon Michael Holt," she said against his chest. "You're my son, my only living child. There's nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you." Clara watched Gideon break. The walls he'd built, the guilt he'd carried, it all crumbled in his mother's embrace. He wept like he hadn't even for Beth. Great shuddering sobs while Margaret held him, murmuring comfort as if he were still a boy. The children watched wide-eyed until Clara quietly shepherded them outside, giving mother and son privacy for their reunion. When they returned an hour later, both Holts had composed themselves, though their eyes were red-rimmed. Margaret was examining Gideon's carvings with wonder. "You kept making them," she said softly. "Even after—" "Couldn't stop," Gideon admitted. "Felt like if I stopped, they'd really be gone. And now—" Margaret's gaze encompassed Clara and the children. "Now they have a new purpose." Gideon's arm came around Clara's shoulders. "Ma, I'd like you to meet my wife, Clara. And these are our children, Samuel and Sarah. Our children, even after months of marriage." Those words still made Clara's heart soar. Margaret studied them all with that penetrating gaze. "Show me," she said to the children. "Show me your favorite carvings." What followed was a delightful chaos as Sarah and Samuel competed to share their treasures, telling elaborate stories about each wooden figure. Margaret listened with genuine interest, occasionally catching Clara's eye with approval. As Clara prepared dinner expanded now to feed 5, she overheard mother and son talking quietly by the fire. "She's good for you," Margaret said. "I can see it in how you move, how you smile. You're alive again." "She saved me," Gideon replied simply. "They all did. When I pulled them from that snowstorm, I thought I was saving them, but it was the other way around." "And the town, do they accept this?" Gideon's voice hardened slightly. "They're learning to—" Clara faced them down, made them see truth instead of gossip. "She's the strongest woman I've ever known. Ma, after Beth would be glad." Margaret interrupted gently. "She loved you too much to want you buried with her. She'd want this, you happy, those children having a father." They stayed up late that night, sharing stories. Margaret told embarrassing tales of Gideon's childhood that had the children giggling and Gideon groaning. Clara shared her own past, her education, her marriage to Thomas, the struggle to survive after his death. "You've both walked hard roads," Margaret observed. "Maybe that's why you fit together so well. You understand loss and the value of what you found." The next morning brought a surprise. Margaret announced she was moving to the territory. "I'm too old to be alone in Ohio," she said briskly. "And I've found my son again. I won't lose more time." She looked at Clara. "If you'll have me nearby, I don't want to intrude." "You could never intrude," Clara said warmly. "The children need a grandmother, and I'd love to have you close." They worked out the details. Henderson knew of a small cabin not far from theirs, abandoned but sound. Gideon and Samuel would help repair it before winter. Margaret would have her independence but be close enough for regular visits. "Grandma Margaret, will you teach me to sew pretty like Mama's trying to?" Sarah asked, climbing onto the older woman's lap. "I'll teach you everything I know, little one," Margaret promised, her eyes suspiciously bright. As summer waned into autumn, their small mountain community grew into something beautiful. Margaret proved to be a fountain of knowledge and stories, teaching Clara advanced needlework and preserving techniques while filling the children's heads with family history. The expansion on the cabin was completed just before the first snow. Samuel and Sarah each had their own small room, though they often ended up together anyway, whispering in the dark. One evening, as early winter snow began to fall, Clara found Gideon standing outside, looking up at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" He pulled her against him, wrapping his coat around them both. "Just thinking how different it all is. Last winter I was alone, had been for years. Now you can barely find a quiet moment," Clara teased. "Wouldn't change it," he said firmly. "Not one single thing." "Nothing?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Not even Martha Withers' sour face?" He chuckled. "Especially not that. Watching you stand up to her, claiming your place, you were magnificent." "We were magnificent," Clara corrected. "All of us, even Sarah with her fierce little speech." "A family," Gideon murmured. "I never thought I'd have that again." "You have it forever," Clara promised. "We're not going anywhere." From inside came the sound of laughter, Margaret teaching the children a song from Gideon's childhood. The windows glowed warm against the falling snow, beacon of home and hope in the wilderness. "You know what Ma said to me yesterday?" Gideon asked. "She said Beth sent you to me. Said angels sometimes work through blizzards and desperate choices. Clara smiled. Maybe she did. Maybe all our lost ones did. Beth and James. Thomas. Maybe they knew we needed each other. The children still pray for their papa sometimes. Gideon said, Samuel told me. They pray for Thomas and thank him for sending them a new father. Clara's eyes filled. They're remarkable. Like their mother. He kissed her gently. Come inside, Mrs. Holmes, your family's waiting. They walked hand in hand back to the cabin, where warmth and laughter beckoned. As Clara paused at the threshold, she looked back at the path that had brought them here, tragedy and loss, rejection and fear, but ultimately love. Love that was stronger than society's rules, deeper than old wounds, more enduring than winter storms. Inside, Sarah called out, Mama, Papa, Grandma's teaching us the funniest song. Coming, sweet one. Clara called back. She and Gideon entered their home together, ready to join their family. The fire crackled. The children giggled. Margaret's voice rose in an old lullaby. And all was right in their mountain world. They were no longer broken pieces trying to survive. They were whole, they were home, and they were loved beyond measure. In the years that would follow, the town of Mercy's Bend would come to speak of them with respect. The mountain family who'd made their own way, proved their own worth. But here, now, in this perfect moment, they needed no one's approval but their own. They had each other. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you all for joining me on this Wild West journey of love, loss, and redemption. I hope Clara and Gideon's story touched your hearts as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening to this tale tonight? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of frontier courage and romance. Share your thoughts on Clara and Gideon's journey. What moment moved you most? Until the next time, partners, keep your fires burning bright and your hearts open to love's possibilities.